I'm Michael Byfield. I'll be the moderator of this session on why small. We've got a great panel today. Before I introduce them, I want to just sort of set the stage. I'm going to repeat a few things that have been said previously about why we're here, why we're looking at this, and some of the demographics that are sort of taking place at this time. We've seen the sort of iconic image of the tradition of the family in the past. The husband is the breadwinner, and the wife is the homemaker, and the 2 or 3 or 4 kids. We've seen this, for years and years, in the 50s especially, the 60s, in sitcoms and other things, Leave It to Beaver. And at the same time, you would think that with the house size decreasing, as indicated on the right, in the 1950s, just under 1,000 square feet, moving up to almost 2,400 square feet here in 2004, that family size would actually be increasing to go along with that. But in truth, as has been stated before by others, it's just actually the opposite. And if you look at some of the trends that have taken place, we mentioned that the combination of 1-person and 2-person households comprises almost 60% of all households. The one that really sticks out for me in red at the bottom of household size is an increase in the number of households with 1 person has increased from 17.1% to 26.4%. In England, it's actually about 35%. The other interesting thing that I find in this is that the percentage of women living alone has increased from 11.5 to 15.2%. So they make up more than single men living alone. To me, that suggests that we need to be able to address that in the housing that we're going to be looking at in the future. I think the panel that we put together here is going to be really, really good at that. The only person that I had known prior to last night was Near, and we got together last night, had some really good conversations, went out to dinner, Ross joined us, and so I think at this point we sort of know each other a little bit better, and I think it's going to be quite an entertaining, I would say, event. And so I'm encouraging that we're going to have a conversation up here and not just a series of presentations. Let me introduce our distinguished panel. If you don't mind, I can read this. Michelle Jurasek. Michelle graduated from North Dakota State University's architecture program and has been working in both Oregon and Minnesota for the past 20 years. She co-owns Departure Architecture Planning and Interiors, where her work focuses on sustainable modern residences, including the recently completed full plane passive house, a living building challenge project that's designed for both net zero energy and net zero water. Her work has been featured on television, and tours, and numerous print and online publications. Michelle credits her Midwestern upbringing for a design sensibility that's rooted in restraint and rational thinking. She seeks forward-thinking solutions and enjoys the challenge of then refining and editing her designs to their essence. As an advocate of sustainable design, she understands that designing small achieves the most goals in our resource-intensive industry. And Michelle walks the small talk by both living and working in just 300 square feet. Our second presenter is Jake Fry. Jake is co-founder of ＳmallWorks Studio and Lane Lane Housing in Vancouver, British Columbia. When he first moved to Vancouver, Jake worked as a finished carpenter and started SmallWorks in 2005 and was, at that time, he became a strong advocate for Lane Lane Housing. SmallWorks is a design-build firm that specializes in design and building small homes as well as Lane Lane houses. He maintains his own factory for prefabrication as well as millwork and incorporates many sustainable building practices and site-specific handling. In addition to the actual design and building of small homes, Jake has worked closely with the City of Vancouver and other municipalities to develop innovative zoning laws to promote small homes. And our third presenter that I know from Eugene is Near Perlson. Near is a licensed Oregon architect who has practiced architecture in Eugene and since obtaining his architectural degree from the University of Oregon in 1995. Following 8 years of working with commercial firms, Near established his firm in 2003, has completed multiple commercial and residential projects, mainly in and around Eugene. Near is a native of Kibbutz in northern Israel, grew up living in a small house within a small, tight-knit communal village, and traveled extensively through diverse countries and cultures before settling in Eugene. Near seeks to identify the subtle contextual patterns of each site, listens for the hidden narrative within the program, and celebrates the project's essence through its design. He combines years of construction trade experience and hands-on craftsmanship with an artistic attention to composition and detail. A people person, Nir believes that the success of each project depends upon establishing lasting partnerships with clients, colleagues, and the greater community. What's going to happen now is that each of the three presenters is going to come up and give a little bit of background. We're going to have a little bit of discussion about some of the issues that we're looking at today. And then they're going to come back again and give some examples of their own work. So it's sort of be a two-part thing going on. So we're going to start this with Nir.
Well, as architects, designers, builders, we all, before we start providing solutions, we really look at the question in kind of a head-on way and try to actually understand it and mine all its meanings. And the whole notion of living in a small house is of course all great, but we felt like it was important to kind of check and see if it really fits our DNA, because we have this pretty recent collective memory that tells us that we have to live in big houses. It's everywhere. It's everywhere in the media and the news, movies. And so a quick look through history reminded us that yes, we actually used to live in very small spaces, starting at 30 million BC. Lucy and the rest of our ancestors lived in caves, and it wasn't until 10,000 BC or so that we start seeing evidence of shelters, tents, yurts. We move this way. The older or the earlier towns were still made of really small buildings, generally speaking, stone, earth, Jericho, and in Israel from 8,000 BC, and then also the Southwest cultures. And we keep going forward, and even the peasant hut in the medieval times was pretty snug, and not only was not that big, but we actually lived there with our animals. So, and it actually appears that there's still a lot of cultures that to this day live this way, and we here don't really remember that most of the time. Of course, industrialization and the massive movement and concentration of people in cities in the last couple hundred years have led to some serious problems, and these are just some examples of tenements in London and then in New York. And as we move forward, we kind of seem to split in these two routes. We still have those who can't afford this beautiful mansion, or even what probably most of us live in, and live in tenements that are really not that, in some cases, not that far from how they used to be in New York and London 100 years ago. Down below is a picture of Pruitt Igoe, which was a notoriously design. At the time, it seemed like it was actually a great fix for everything. Tenement housing, built in the 50s, demolished in the 70s, not a minute too soon. The issue apparently wasn't really just that it wasn't really about the size, it was about the organization and the social engineering which kind of was behind really breaking patterns of and cultures, and these are issues that we have to address at this point. So where do we go from here now that we have these big McMansions?
For me? Yeah, Jake. Okay. Do you mind just doing the clicker and all this here? Sorry, am I on? Can you hear me? So I wanted to start off, because on the heels of this, I think I'm going to talk about two small things, but I am from Canada, and we would normally start off a session like this, and it just feeds off your comment, with recognizing in Canada, with a gathering like this, we would take a moment to recognize that we were being hosted by the Coast Salish Nation, and that we were seated on land that had been taken from those people and is still under dispute. And I think that's very important in the context of talking about this, because one of the things I think we recognize with people with sensitivity anyway, that there has been a lot of we live in a very dynamic, beautiful city in Vancouver. It's reported to be, and at the same time, there's a lot of negative things which have happened, which I think are in keeping with all North American life, which really looks at issues around defoliation and sort of the environmental degradation. That said, I think it's really important about Vancouver and very different, and that I'm bringing to this conference, is that we live in a city which has, unlike the last few years, we haven't had a recession in Canada. And we, I might ask you to flip the slide, we actually live in this anomaly, even maybe in North American terms, where you can start to see how, and we're in orange, how quickly our house prices have gone up. So I can tell you, as of Monday, when I last checked, the median house price for a regular single-family home is $935,000. If we go to the next slide, our income has not gone up. And in fact, at this point, the mean income for a Vancouver family is around $100,000 combined income if both people are working. So typically what we're sitting at is, even with the requisite 25%, 20% that you need for a mortgage in Canada, which is different than here, you're still looking at 80% of your income to afford your monthly mortgage fees. So very different environment, and it's with that I wanted to talk a little bit about then what we're bringing to the table in this discussion, which is actually a very interesting dynamic, which I've tried to capture by talking about impoverishment by affluence. But I also think it touches on situations that are here in the States as well, and why there's a move to start to look towards something that I would say, is an assessment of two things. One is we start to look at housing needing to fulfill need over want. And we also look at a scenario, which I think is equally important, which has to do with how we need to shift the orientation of our housing to address that, and how, in our context, one of the solutions we came up with, if we flip over, is that what happens in Vancouver specifically is that as we try to address this housing issue, we move to something which became recently coined as Vancouverism. We started to intensify multifamily in the core. We started to regenerate the core. It's actually quite pleasant, moving industrial areas into really dynamic living spaces, but it's also somewhat at the cost of that humane single-family home, which a lot of people really seek. And in turn, what happens, a large proportion of Vancouver has actually then remained in a suburb, and that suburb has started to dwindle in population. We're down about 2.1 person per household, where the peak when the houses were made were really meant to house about 4, which was the mean sort of around 1950. And so what happens is the housing prices, this is where the housing prices have really jumped up, and we have a lot of speculation. And out of that, we have these dying neighborhoods, which are, and literally I'm being a little verbose with that, but at the same time, you really do have dwindling communities. And in fact, to the point where, within the internal news recently, as of last month, they've actually started groups in core areas of downtown so people can come together and meet, because it's been determined it's one of the hardest cities to make friends and actually start off in the community. We have a lot of immigrant population that comes to Vancouver. And then so our way of dealing with this part, and we'll get into the next session, is that if we put this on, is that now we've come up with laneway housing, termed ADU here, and very much the same dynamic on these single-family lots, creating a small home for which we can have a second residence. Albert and Chuck?
Well, I'm really glad to be the one tasked with, in this deficit of resources, to be talking about that there's a lot of hope. And there's a lot of reason to believe that the housing industry is finally ready to change and to look towards smaller homes as a really viable solution. And we can see it in the recent trends showing that median home sizes are finally reducing. It's been a small amount, but I think it's a really promising sign. But there are a lot of, we talked in the keynote session and with Jordan about some of the demographics that are going to be driving this shift. And I want to talk about 2 really significant populations that are going to fuel that. The first group is, any of us who have experienced this housing crisis and this recession firsthand. And what we've learned from that is that we can no longer look at our homes as a short-term investment, and we also understand the imperative of being financially sustainable. And like our grandparents who experienced the Great Depression, we will forever be shaped and changed with this newfound awareness of waste and a frugal sensibility. And so the housing industry really needs to change to address this new demographic. And then the other group that I think bears talking about, and Ross talked about it this morning, is the echo boomers. And these are people who are looking at the world through a new lens, through a really different lens. They've got an ecological consciousness that previous generations haven't had. There have been some recently published studies that, widely published, that are pretty fascinating about their declining interest in automobiles. You know, even driver's license figures have been dropping amongst this population. And it signals a trend away from conventional auto-based suburbs. And just that particular lifestyle. But interestingly, despite declining interest in that same group around automobiles, by vast majorities, they are interested in owning homes. And Ross talked this morning about some of the challenges that group is going to face. They've got these student loan debts. They're entering the job market with less income than previous generations. And they've also got tighter lending standards to face when they do go to the bank. And so again, it's really imperative that the housing industry shifts to make homes a reality for this demographic. And so while there's been interest and movement to simplify really since the 1960s, it's been sort of this simmering movement. And, Sarah Susenka came out, with her book in 1998, The Not So Big House, and, to widespread interest. And even though, people really embrace those ideas, home sizes still continue to rise over the following decade. But I think what's really different about this moment in time is that with all of these demographics and these confluences of events and the ecological climate change that we're facing right now, I think we're at a really unique moment to capitalize, to make this shift towards smaller housing. So I think it becomes imperative upon all of us architects and designers to really, did I do that? No. Sorry. It becomes really imperative for all of us to really lead this movement with strong visions, like Ross's visions this morning of what smaller homes really can be.
I should mention before I tell you a little bit about the slide. I teach at the University of Oregon and down in Eugene, and been on the faculty there for 15 years, and I co-directed the housing focus with my colleague Peter Keyes, who's in the audience. And we tried to put together a housing program that deals with not only the neighborhood scale. I teach a class called community design, teach another class called minimal dwelling, and this term I'm teaching a class called housing prototypes here in Portland that Ross guest lectured in yesterday. This slide is one that I use in all of those classes. When I was a kid growing up in Southern California, I used to go to Disneyland. There was the Monsanto House of the Future. This was all about plastics. And this was looking at technology as the savior for everything that we're ever going to be doing in housing. And so it had newfangled, contraptions like microwaves and all these other things going on there. And I was just totally intrigued by this when I was a youngster. I thought, God, this is what architecture is all about. And as I became more involved, not just in building design, but in site planning, it became really apparent to me that this is something that is really an excuse for not really addressing the issues, proper solar orientation, looking at the uniqueness of the site and other things. And I just wanted to use this slide as a reminder that technology is really, really good, but we can't rely on it entirely because it has a tendency to make us feel that we can do just about anything, anywhere. And so if you look at the slide, you'll see that the house doesn't have any engagement with the land. It doesn't have the layers that Ross talked about. It's up on a plinth, and it could be placed anywhere. In this particular context, it's next to the Matterhorn. So there's, just want to caution you on that a little bit. So, this is, sort of preaching to the choir here today, but it's obvious that large houses on large lots are not sustainable. And it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but I thought I'd just touch on a few things in terms of smaller lots. And it's real obvious, well, in Oregon, because we have urban growth boundaries, we've sort of been in a position that we're actually able to contain growth and be able to retain some of our agricultural and forest areas and wetlands and things. But at the same time, there are a lot of areas that don't have these. So the argument needs to be made on why smaller lots are appropriate. And there's some real obvious things, but there's an argument to be made to cities, especially because of, and I'm sure they're aware of this, but the idea that infrastructure is so great, and if you have higher densities, you're going to have less infrastructure per individual unit, is one thing. But the other thing that comes up, not only in transportation cost and moving back and forth and embodied energy and all sorts of other issues that are associated with this, are the things in terms of services like police and fire, that because of response times that are required, low density sprawl requires more substations for those, whereas higher density, you might have the same number of firefighters and policemen, but you don't have to have as many substations for that. So there are all sorts of incentives for why higher density is really appropriate. And it's pretty obvious, I think, in terms of why, what this conference is all about in terms of the ideas of why smaller units, and Jordan hit on many of those earlier. I think the real key here, though, is to be able to get the mindset of the people that live in the large single-family detached houses in suburbia and be able to design smaller units at higher densities in a meaningful way and give them everything that they want, at least what they think they want. And some of those, everybody would like to have some form of privacy, both visual and auditory, usable outdoor space, safety and security, some form of parking. It doesn't necessarily have to be directly adjacent to the unit, but it has to be in close proximity. Storage, the identity, sense of individual identity, and the sense of community. And Ross, I think, did a really good job of talking about that earlier. So these are just some of the things that these individuals that are up here on our panel are going to talk about in some of their own work today. So I'll turn that over to Nir.
Thank you. So yeah, again, this is just a kind of a visual reminder of, when we design as architects, questioning ourselves, can we really provide for all these different needs? People partying, coming from extended family to come and hang out and stay together. That's a real issue even for a single parent family. And the ability to have some intimate time and in privacy. The human reality of having arguments. I mean, can we actually have a space where we can actually express ourselves without feeling shamed and being worried that the police is going to show up and haul us off because there's no acoustic privacy, and even time to take time out for a kid to be able to be separate, or for a couple to be separate from each other and still enjoy all the well-being amenities of a big house. So just going into this, this is a series of diagrams that really touch on things that were already mentioned by Ross and of course by Sarah Susanka and a lot of different people. This is just a kind of a specific, it's one specific house that we've designed, and it just has expressions of these various qualities that we try to create in the space. So the first one is overlapping spaces and mixing activities. Obviously, things have shifted dramatically, but we used to meet in a dining room that was separate from the kitchen, that was separate from the living room, that was separate from the entry. And of course, all these type of houses that we're looking at, there's a great room, and it'll have to include everything and do it in an elegant way so that you can indeed have various activities take at different times or even at the same time. So double and triple dutying the space to take care of all that. The next would be to make sure everything is connected. So in this plan diagram is just a diagram showing the connectivity. So again, if you're within a pretty confined number of rooms, you want to make sure that there's a connectivity, and so that you can flow from space to space, not just visually, but also physically. You don't need to have long hallways leading and connecting things. The connections and the overlapping really work together to kind of make the place be more varied, flexible, and really accommodate a variety of activities. The next thing is the definition. So within, we don't want to fall into this trap where we just have this big open space and there's no real definition between activities, because there's something really important about being able to do that. Not just between various parts of the house, but even within a big space. And of course, Sarah Shanka talks about it, and Ross talked about it. Creating elements. Maybe there's some kind of definition with a structural element. Maybe the ceiling structure can define a certain space. Counters, low walls. In this case, there's an altar that leads. It kind of makes you jog from the public, more open room to the private wing. So there's a certain transition just by walking past this altar, turning left, then you're kind of, hopefully there's a certain shift in the mind space of where you are. The next thing, what we call stretch, and that's long vistas, long views. Keep the horizon as far as possible, and it is important. It's important, and it is this sense of expansive kind of calm. I think that you imagine people in these big LA villas up on the mountains above LA. So how can we create that? Because it is a beautiful sense, and it does create. It does expand. It helps to relax, and it helps to feel more connected to other things. So make sure we align enough openings and align the rooms in a way that you can see from one room to the next room, and hopefully even beyond that room to the outdoors, just so you can understand that you're not a cellular piece, but you're actually connected to more of a web that's around you. The next is what we call curl, or creating cozy spaces. So again, within this kind of more open context, which we'll have to employ for small houses, how do we still create a place or places where we can take a break, take a breath, do something that's more quiet, that's more individualistic, that's more us, a sense of enclosure without having to enclose yourself. And this could be done in a corner. It could be done even with an object. In this plan, we're even showing a little curl sign in front of the fireplace, because that is a place that defines a coziness. The living room has a little bay, so you can have a little love talk and not feel like you're just unseparated from everything else. The next thing is what we called view, which is really just to remind us that we're connected to nature, and specifically be able to see sky, be able to see plants, be able to see the living world around you, the seasons, the potentially even birds and whatever life that happens around you. So it's not only the ability to see it, but also the ability to walk and connect to it. So these view arrows are not only visual, but also the ability to walk and expand the outdoors, expand the indoors to the outdoors through outdoor spaces, which Ross talked about. Illuminate. Daylight is essential. It really creates huge variety in a space. It really defines, it allows us to be connected to the time of day, to the time of year. It makes spaces dynamic because the contrast of shadow and light really enliven everything, and they move throughout the day. So in places like these where we're really trying to be expansive. Just the expansion of level of light and natural light when possible is going to be very helpful. And the last thing that we call it play. As architects, we're so obsessed and concerned with having everything figured out. And especially in small houses, we have to be very deliberate and thoughtful about how we organize the spaces. So everything is ordered. There's a rhythm. There's a pattern. There's a logic, and it's really important every now and again to just tweak it. So we should create those boundaries of design and then tweak them and push and break out of them. And in this case, we just show a couple of examples where we lifted this canopy up in kind of an unexpected way, and hopefully that'll help enliven the space and bring some spontaneity and humor. And there's a little loft that we kind of mined out of the taller space in the building that is literally could be a play space or just a little quick surprise.
This way I won't have to crane my neck. So let's see. So I'm going to expand a little bit on the principles that Nir talked about, and then I'm just going to key in on a couple of disparate places in the house that I think are really terrific places to save space and make homes really livable still. The first one is volume that I want to talk about, and you know, when we're designing for small spaces, small is great, but we're still tasked with creating wonderful spaces. And I think volume is simply one of my favorite tools to make small spaces still feel really wonderful. And you can do a couple of things. One, you can either have taller ceilings or you can have vaulted ceilings. And by doing that, by creating a little added volume, you can stack some space like these two images show. These aren't our projects. But you know, the image on the left, you can see that a bed space, you know, gets placed over what appears to be a closet, and I'd expect that maybe a bathroom is underneath there. And then on the right-hand image, again, a bed gets stacked over a kitchen. And you know, as far as stacking spaces, both kitchens and bathrooms can easily handle a 7-foot ceiling. You know, don't be afraid of going down to that mark. And then spaces that can even handle a much lower ceiling than that are, again, you know, wherever you sleep, and like Nir's talking about places to curl up and to read or to have a nap or to just sit and be quiet. And then, of course, storage and closets can go in much lower spaces. So you can start to stack spaces in, it doesn't have to be a 2-story space to stack 2 spaces over one another. Sure. Oh yeah, actually here, I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump back. There was one other thing that I wanted to say about this, and so while it's great to stack spaces over the top of one another, it's really important to still retain that taller volume in some of the home, because that taller volume starts to provide some relief for the smaller spaces, for the more compact spaces that you have. And so you know, not only does it provide relief, but you start to create a really dynamic home. You know, you compress and then you expand into a larger space, and honestly, I just think that it's a lot more interesting than having static, you know, 8 or 9 foot ceilings throughout a home. So it just makes for more interesting architecture. I want to talk about bedrooms in particular, just because I think that they're such a crazy waste of space in most homes. The typical queen bed is just 33 square feet, and in the U.S., a modest size bedroom, is typically 10 by 12, and that's 120 square feet. And so you've got almost 90 square feet in most bedrooms that's dedicated to circulation, largely so that you can walk on the other side of the bed, so that you know, you can make the bed or you know, just facilitate access over there. And I just, you know, if you want to look for a really quick way to knock some square footage out of your designs, you know, that's the first place that I would look. And then plus, I just don't think that they're interesting. I think that that's I think that those make for pretty ordinary bedrooms, uninspiring. And so, if you feel it's really, if your client or if you feel that having space on both sides of the bed is important so that people can get up in the middle of the night or whatever it is, I like this example on the left where that access is provided, but minimize it. Just because you provide access doesn't mean it needs to be 2 feet or more. And then you can also don't be afraid to look to other spaces to put your bed. I mean, maybe that image on the right isn't right for all adults, or maybe it's not right for a bed all the time, but maybe it's a guest bed, or maybe that's a nap spot. But look at how charming that is. I think it looks like a wonderful place. I'd be delighted to have that in my own home. Also look to alcoves. This shows a little more of a children's room example on the left, but that can just as easily be a nook for an adult-sized bed that can be brought down to just the regular floor level, and just recess it, and you just start to save a lot of the square footage of the circulation around. And then again, the example on the right-hand side shows a bedroom that has access on both sides, and it's just the bedroom becomes a little less defined. It's more an alcove off to the side, and it's with a little more reduced circulation on both sides of it. Another place I want to talk about is, another item I want to talk about is appliances, and compact appliances in particular, because compact appliances are a terrific way to not sacrifice amenities in smaller homes, to still get all of the amenities and all of the performance just in a little less space. And so let's start with refrigerators. This is a project that we did do. That's 10 lineal feet, and I've known the people that have lived in this, lived and used this kitchen, and they're thrilled with it. That's a 2-foot wide refrigerator, and it's a counter depth refrigerator. This is a terrific solution. And when you open up these refrigerators, they don't have those really stout, beefy walls that some more conventional refrigerators have. They actually have thinner walls, and so even though they look a lot smaller, sure, you've lost some of the cubic footage, but you've not lost maybe as much as you'd expect to lose. And the other place with refrigerators that you can look to is under cabinet refrigerators. And one of the things that I bump into is we've had plenty of clients that have expressed interest in under cabinet refrigerators, but they're nervous about resale issues with that. And I'd say that if you live near your greengrocer where you're going to be going with some frequency to keep a refrigerator stocked, I think you can make that choice with confidence. And it's not, remember, this is an option that you can, that you could always change later, or a future homeowner could come in and change later. The other things that we see here, this is an 18-inch dishwasher, and an 18-inch dishwasher is a pretty good option, especially for smaller homes, to save 6 inches off of the normal size of a dishwasher. The range, typical ranges are 30 inches. They're sometimes even larger, but there are a whole host of 24-inch wide ranges, and they're by all the, all the high-end manufacturers make these ranges. And what's really cool about them is that you don't sacrifice any performance at all. All that you lose is that wasted space that sits in between the burners anyway. So, why not make that shift? I just think it makes a lot of sense. And then there are also pretty terrific 2-burner stoves that you can look at too. And I think that a lot of people could actually adapt to a 2-burner cooktop. And if you're concerned about the 1 or 2 times a year where it's maybe a little more cooking intensive, you can always look at having like a portable catering burner that you can bring out and put on the countertop to grow your kitchen, as it were. And then I want to talk about the ʻsuperwallʼ. The ʻsuperwallʼ is an approach to Its intent is to create this real workhorse of both performance in your home to keep it out of the way, but still yet have a really strong design element. This again isn't our project, but we have been we've been doing similar ones of these. And with the ʻsuperwallʼ, what we look at doing is taking a 24-inch swath, kind of like Ross was talking about in his presentation. You take a 24-inch wide zone at, it can be one whole wall of a room. It can bridge, the whole length of a house if you want. And when it's low, when it's 18 inches high, it can be a bench. It can be a place to stack books. You can put a cushion on it and make more comfortable seating. It can become banquet seating when you host Thanksgiving dinner. It's really flexible. When it grows up to 36 inches, it can become part of your counter. It's a work surface. It becomes part of the kitchen. And then when it starts to grow up taller than that, it can be a wardrobe closet, and it can be, just loads of storage. You can see the kind of flexibility we're talking about. And in the image on the right, what they've done here is, it's this whole long zone. It's a really strong architectural element. These people get an enormous amount of storage out of this powerful piece that it sort of stays out of the way. And then this is an interior elevation of a ʻsuperwallʼ for a project that we have under construction. And this is the north elevation of all 3 stories in the house. And if you start down on the lower left, those are all benches with open storage underneath. It morphs into the kitchen, low counters, up, and then to a refrigerator surround. And then it drops down to some bookshelves, and then the accessory dwelling unit kitchen in the back. The next level, it's a wardrobe, more shelf. You get the idea, right? So I think it's a really fun design element, and it's just high performance.
So back to me. So I'm going to take up a little bit where I left off, again using this anomaly of Vancouver. But where before we were just talking about what we found was what I would describe as that we had we had sort of an impoverishment because of affluency, and part of it is that we have this environment that's declining because the city is in one way by GDP standards doing so well, but by the household it's a real challenge. People have a lot of difficulty with rent. Ownership is untenable for most people, and so we have a very this has got a point, right? So we have this small core here, which has got normal city sort of density. As we move out into here, we're not talking far distances. This is within a 20-minute drive during rush hour. These neighborhoods in blue have no population in context to what we have here. We're getting down to 1 people household in here, and in these areas here might have 2-3 people at most. But we have these large suburban lots. And what happens is that you have vacant areas, we discussed. And I think one of the big shifts that we're starting to take a look at, and I think it's very baby steps, is something I call, basically looking at the commonwealth. So, that way. Do I throw it? I throw it at the machine. Okay. So starting to take a look at commonwealth and how are we going to approach this city? How are we going to intensify the city without going, without having to look at these huge plans and try and reinvent the wheel? One of the things, of course, is this small lane house that we've come up with as an idea, and we're starting to get some actually really good uptake. It's been 3 years, 600 permits have been issued, 300 houses are done, which shows that there's an appetite. Now, and I pulled this slide up. This is a house we made for the Olympics when it was up in Vancouver, but it shows this nice contrast. So right in the middle of this intense area, we set up a little actual functional house. But what we're looking at is trying to how can we start to have this dialogue? How can we start to put in some small houses and actually have, almost like a mini pocket neighborhood to look at that. And if we switch the slides, we're taking a look at, the other challenge, talking about this, how empty Vancouver is that 68% of the landmass of Vancouver are these single-family lots. And if we look at that, not only is the households down, but when you look at that 68%, 42% of that is dedicated to the car. So if you count front yards, because of a very antiquated single-family residential bylaw, where we have a very substantive front yard up to 25%. I think, is that right, Kane? About 25%? Yeah, 2025. The road, the boulevard to the road, and a laneway, that makes up our 42%. So we need to kind of open up that critter and put, how are we going to start to change that? And you know, it's baby steps. We'd love to see little pocket neighborhoods and so forth. But the one thing we know we can do right now is the laneway house. And I think it's really important because I think it starts to form that fundamental shift where, again, using that term of commonwealth, where we start to look at these neighborhoods and can we start to have a dialogue with the people who live there when we start to change ownership of a single family lot. When we get together with neighborhood groups and we talk to them, people are like, well, what's, you know, it's the normal NIMBYism of what's going to happen next to me. But what we need to recognize, and I think it starts to happen in our town, is that we're getting some traction on the idea that we can actually look at this is a common area, and this is that these land masses that are dedicated to cars, or front yards, and so forth, actually belong to all of us. And how can we better use that for all of us? And how can we take the single family ownership and start to shift that? So one thing we're seeing with the laneway houses that's really exciting is we start to see a lot of joint ownership. Right now what's happening is about 80% of our clients, which constitutes about 20% of the numbers I gave you, the laneway houses that have been built, are actually family members that have entered into a co-ownership agreement with the property owner. So it's mom and dad saying you can build in the back, you have to carry that mortgage, but you can have some equity in the property. Another mother who might sell her house that she's living in and pay for the little home in the back, the laneway home, outright, but gets a little piece of the property, and meanwhile the family gets to acquire the wealth of selling this multi-million-dollar house and avoids inheritance taxes, which is a big thing we have, but you don't have that here in the same way. If we could split the slide. So what we look at is like, can we make these little spaces at the same time, you know, have a very generous feel on the inside, which is always a challenge with a small house, but also recognize with the slide beside it that the neighborhood is key to this development. And the neighborhood is intricate, that we have to approach the neighborhoods as being shared, as a shared amenity that is used by the laneway house. I mean, you can look at making a small house, and we've done quite a few of them, and at the same time, they're always going to be a small house, and as much as we get the nooks and crannies, they're not going to be everything. But what will be everything is if we can join the community within the context of that living space. And I think that's really perhaps the single most important feature. And as planners, people working in the planning department, and as people outreaching to the planning department, I think there needs to be some recognition of that. That doesn't happen, because often what's happening is we deal with homeowner to neighbor in these discussions, but we really don't deal with what do we need as a whole, as a thriving community to make that community work. And I think that's an anomaly that have been getting some traction with in Vancouver because of this disparagement of income and need. I mean, we actually need, because of the influx of people into Canada, we actually need 200,000 households in the next 22 years. And we have no more land to build on. And are we just going to put people in towers? And that's the decision that's actively being discussed in Vancouver, and it's a really dynamic time. With that, I also was prompting us to talk in a bit of a conversation. I don't know if this is an appropriate time to break into that, but I think it's good.
I found it fascinating because living in Eugene, we always shake our head and say, oh my God, the land prices or the cost of real estate has gone so much higher over the last 20 years. But it's ridiculous when you compare it to Vancouver. Basically, it was like Vancouver, San Francisco, and obviously, if it's happening there, it's not going to bypass us. I mean, so basically, he's just Jake is and people in these environments are basically the messengers and the scouts that are telling us of what's happening and what's going to happen to all of us. And obviously, it's going to be in Portland soon. I guess it's sooner than and then in Eugene eventually, and really everywhere else.
Well, I think the two things that are going to come to the fore that I think are going to hit us like a brick wall is, Vancouver, we have, for the lack of a better term, it's kind of a destination city. There's a lot of ownership of people who don't live there, and there's any number of dynamics that really bring up the housing prices. And people have a lot of equity, so it's easy for them to act on these small infill houses because it doesn't have the same barriers to purchase. But that said, I think the same dynamics are here. We have huge housing, we have huge property taxes. We haven't hit the recession. There's all these things coming together that raises up this dynamic. On the other hand, you're coming out of a recession, but it's quite soon your country's going to have to start paying for energy in a way they haven't paid for. And there's going to be different dynamics which are forcing the same type of, I call it impoverishment in my city by affluence. You're going to have a different type of impoverishment on the same grounds. We can't consume, we can't build the way we have, and what is that transition is going to look like? And I think you're going to start to deal with a different equation, but it's an equation that has the same dynamics that I'm talking about.
And I think it ties back to us and talking about everybody who's here today and everybody who's thinking about these things, because we do have to be, and we are the leaders of what's going on, because we all know that typically a post-recession mood is, oh, we're fine, it's over, just let's start drinking again. And we have it. Oh, everything is coming down, just build. And so it's basically, I think we do have this tendency to just go back to what we did before. Okay, now we can continue doing what we just were doing until 5 years ago.
And my hunch is that, I think my sense is that it's more than a hunch, but that the depth of this past recession has left a different mark on us, and it's a little more indelible. In the ADUs that we're seeing, the interest in ADUs that we've been seeing recently really is geared towards creating a new financial sustainability that I hadn't seen before. I think that's going to be a powerful shift for the market.
So Michelle and Nir sort of talked about design principles for individual units, and Jake talked about principles of community. And we've got time for each of them now to show how this can be implemented in their own work. And so, Nir, I think you're up first.
That was my last slide.
Okay. So this is just an introduction to a few case studies of projects that we did, and picked obviously houses that are small. This one is my own studio actually, and the principles are below, pretty simple. It's a reuse of an existing garage, bye-bye to the garage, and you can see in the plan how the upper section is what's left of the garage. So basically on the back end of this building, there's a 7-foot deep space, and it's 7 feet just because that's the length of the door when it goes up and hits against the wall, and then it's just shelf under it. And then just what I call upward excavation, which is basically, it had a flat ceiling, removed the ceiling, put these little steel site-built scissors trusses, and went upward and put a dormer in there, and just started to enliven the space. And it's about 550 square feet, and actually it is designed, just back to it for a second, it's designed as an ADU. So since right now it's my office, my studio, I don't have to pay SBCs on it, and it's just an extension of my home. But it already has a bathroom, it has a washer-dryer hookup, it has a gas line inserted in there, and a little kitchenette that could be expanded. So the idea is that once, if my office grows and I need to move out of there, or if for some reason we need to move things around, then this will become a rental. It's on an alley, so this isn't a laneway house right here. This is a typical, mid-century, low-slung, modern but kind of depressing house that it started with. Very low ceilings. There was a corridor there that was basically, I think, 2 feet 4 inches wide or something. So we kind of redid the downstairs, but we lost a bedroom in the process because we did have to make it a bit more humane. So we went up. So we loosened everything up. We went upwards, and we just cleaned everything up. And it's not a big house. I don't remember exactly how many square feet, but it's really just a couple of really small bedrooms downstairs, and then a master suite with an office upstairs. This is Olive Street is just a little addition. It's an additional building It's bigger than an ADU because it's in a part of town where the code allows for a couple of units on a single urban lot. And it was designed specifically as a rental with just 2-story and then one little bedroom on the downstairs. You can see it on the right side. And then 2 bedrooms upstairs. One of them is bigger and connected to the bathroom. So it's kind of a master-ish bedroom. And we just, the shift. On the right-hand side, this was kind of the square, the original square. So we really didn't add that much downstairs. We just added a little space for the stairs, and we added a little bit for the kitchen for the back entry, and then a covered porch in the front, which is this right here. And then the upstairs is basically where we created more space. So, you know, very small footprint increase, but upstairs, pretty nice kind of master bedroom, bathroom, dressing, and then some open spaces for office and study or family or whatever activity can take place there. This is an ADU. It's an 800 square foot house, 2 floors on a sloped hill. The lady who owned the house next door, which is right here behind those trees, wanted to let her daughter move on to the site with the daughter's son. So a single mom, a child with special needs, a dog, you can see him right there. And we needed to fit all of that into 800 square feet, and it was definitely a fun exercise, just to create something that's really small and that still really works. So there's a ton of windows, stacking the floors obviously, and then there's a lot of light and views all around. Covered outdoor space. You can see, you know, down here at the entry, downstairs, and then there's another kind of entry up here, which is a bigger covered space, and it leads directly to Grandma's house. You walk down these stairs, and you're on a patio that's then belongs to this house back here, which is where Grandma lives. And then actually we created this storage space that's really legally only accessed from the outside, and therefore we don't have to count it. So we actually stole another 100 square feet because we could. And this door is actually not there, but when the codes change, and they probably will change at some point, it'll be easy to just punch a walkway through here and use this internally as well, this little daylight basement.
It's really not there?
Excuse me?
It's really not there?
Yeah. And this is a River Road house. It's an ADU as well, 800 square feet. You can see the main house on the property is back there. It's been rented probably for the last 25 years or so, and the owners live on this very spot, but they lived in a 600 square foot house, so this is a villa for them. They lived in a building that was a remodeled chicken coop, But there was some really sweet characteristics to it, so we tried to kind of emulate them in this newer building. And that's the building that I was using before for these diagrams. So this is just a sample of kind of the stretch concept of how we can see through spaces and out to the outdoors. Obviously, not everybody has the ability to have a big urban garden like they do. They have a really huge lot in the River Road area in Eugene, one of those old, cool, big lots. But this is a house that we think could work in urban settings as well, and with some modifications. And you know, it's definitely site designed, but it's also could work, you know, when there's southern exposure and views to various directions, even if it's views of houses. And this is just a kind of the curl concept again mentioned here. And then the opening to the outdoors and the transitions and the kind of passages from the kind of the great room into the more private area back here, which is where the bathroom and the washer dryer and then the bedroom is located.
Oh wait, one more.
We've been fortunate to have gotten to work on some really fun projects here in the city. And this one's no exception. Musicians Dwellings is down in southeast Portland, south of just Ladd's Addition. It's a 1,400 square foot residence. Most of the ground floor is devoted to storage and to the garage, and most of the living actually happens on the level up above that. I'll click through the smart images. And I'll talk too about some of the principles that we typically employ with smaller homes to make them feel a little more livable. One thing that's fun to note about this project in particular is this wood that you're seeing as the siding. It was actually originally used at the Oregon State Mental Hospital on the ground. So you know, it's got this interesting personality to it. And you know what, I also think this goes a little bit beyond our topic of designing for smaller, but one of the more successful things about this home is the use of salvaged materials. It starts to lend a real timeless quality, and it sort of roots the home in some history. So this is the main living space, and what the homeowner was looking for, he's there in the shower on the right-hand side. This was the most interesting photo shoot that I've ever been on, I think. But anyway, so what this homeowner was looking for, he's a jazz musician, and he wanted a really open, flexible living space for practicing his music, also doing some visual arts, practicing music with his trio, and then also hosting house concerts. And so remarkably, this space that you're looking at is able to do all of those things and provide a place to just live, right? And so the kitchen is off in the right-hand corner. It's very compact, and it just becomes this big open zone for for living and being creative. Something interesting about him is that he wasn't interested in a conventional living room because he wants a space that helps him be creative, and so he wasn't looking for a sofa and a conventional television. And this project's interesting because for as much of an anomaly as this program sounds like, the number of people that have walked through this home and have said that they could see themselves living like this, has been a surprisingly high number. But just looking back at some of the principles that were employed that Nir talked about, obviously there's an abundance of natural light. We've got this flexibility of space. One of the things that I think is really fun is the spiral staircase, this glossy yellow spiral staircase. And I think that in part gets to the principle of play that Nir was talking about. And I think it's really valuable. Oh, and then also volume. This one, he needed a high ceiling for the kind of visual arts that he's doing, and then there we go. And so this voluminous space on the main level is then counterbalanced against a little sleeping penthouse, which I was going for more of a treehouse vibe when I created that space. It's got lower ceilings, and it's a much more compact room despite the photographer's wide-angle lens. It's actually pretty small, and it's surrounded with sliding glass doors out onto this roof deck that we're seeing on the left, so it just lends a sense of spaciousness and airiness to an otherwise pretty compact space. And one of the really important things that I took from this project is again this value of volume that we were talking about, and also to not be scared of making spaces more compact. And this bedroom, as much as I love how it turned out, when I went back later, I thought, you know what, this could be more compact. The ceiling could actually be lower and reinforce the sense that I was going for. And really that bed, instead of sort of, being there in the center as it is, why not actually push it over to the windows, right? If you want to experience the windows, get them, really get the bed over there. And we'll see later, I was able to do that in another project. This is a terrific illustration, I think, of what small living can be like. And this was originally a 1,500 square foot single family residence in North Portland. And it was subdivided into, well, not subdivided, but it was separated into two 750 square foot units. And so it went duplex instead of ADU, but essentially the same thing. This has the same kitchen that we saw in that compact appliances slide. And what I think this is a terrific illustration is this is a garden level apartment. It's essentially a basement unit, and it doesn't feel anything like a basement. I mean, it's light filled and it's open, and so I think with thoughtfulness, we can make these basement ADUs or we can make these spaces really wonderful. So this is a project of ours that was just recently completed. The Full Plane Passive House is also going for Full Living Building Challenge certification, and so that means it's designed to be net zero energy and net zero water. So it's a pretty exciting project to work on. So this one, I think it's in the neighborhood of 1,700 some square feet. I think this might show up later this afternoon in the slam too. But you'll start to see a lot of the same techniques being used, a lot of glassiness to make smaller spaces feel much larger and to give you a real physical connection to outdoor living space, just to expand where you are. Again, a very open and flexible living, dining, kitchen area. Another tool that I think is really important with smaller homes, is to simplify your material palettes. Because whenever you can do that, you're going to pull, you're going to blur the edges of spaces. And, I think the same holds true for even ceiling materials and ceiling planes. The more that you can extend all of these planes and materials indoors and outdoors and from one room into the other, you'll make spaces start to feel larger. So these are the stairs, and then the image on the right. So this is the bathroom sink for the primary bathroom, and there is no enclosure right there, and it looks out over over the stairwell that you're seeing to the left, and then out to a window beyond. And so, it goes back to Nir's point about views and sort of these layered views through other spaces that I think can make spaces pretty wonderful. So this is a project I'm really I'm excited about every project, but but this one is under construction right now. It's up in North Portland, and I really got to put into practice all of these techniques that we were talking about here. It's a single-family residence with an attached ADU. I think it ends up being, 1,800 square feet, but that includes 350 square foot ADU. So and this house, as the name implies, is designed for flexibility. So if we take a look at the floor plan, it's actually such a simple floor plan. It's sort of deceptively simple, and we were able to do some nice things with overhangs to make the project sculpturally a little more interesting. But the first floor plan is really simple. Again, you know, to the left it's this straightforward living, dining, kitchen space. The super wall that I was talking about before is all along that north edge along the top. It goes, you know, from start to finish on the house. And so when you walk in, you get this terrific long vista through all of the spaces. The ADU is at the back end, and that can either be an ADU or it can be, or it's also intended to be workspace for the artists. The two homeowners are both artists, and so they'll use it for their creative space when they want to, or if they're not around, or if their circumstances change, then that becomes an easy place to rent as an isolated, you know, enclosure. On the second, well, this really isn't a second level so much as it's just a loft. And this is another one of those projects. In this one, we actually have, it's 2-story spaces, both in the ADU and in the living, dining, kitchen. And the ADU just has a loft over the top of it, and the loft can either be tethered back down to the ADU or it can be part of the main house. And with that loft, too, let's see, does this work for me? Oh, there you go. Yeah, so the loft over is in this zone here, and I can't tell whether the bed is actually shown, but this is a case where the bed is actually pushed up against these windows because, you know, why not? It's a compact space, and I think it could be pretty charming. And then the penthouse. Again, this is another sleeping penthouse. I think this is just going to be a really exciting space. This has 7-foot ceilings. Oh, and actually, I'll jack you back over here for a second. So this, there we go. Yeah, so this area underneath the loft, that's a 7-foot ceiling. And then when we come over here, that's also a 7-foot ceiling. So we've got 13-foot ceilings here, 15-foot ceilings, 7-foot ceilings over here. So again, you get this back and forth between these really great volumes and then these compressed volumes. I think it'll be fun. And then the penthouse up here just has 7-foot ceilings. And in this space, it's pretty interesting. It essentially is a master suite without all the, you know, kind of, ostentatious qualities that go with master suites. And the circulation in this whole design is really simplified out in front of this super wall, both on this level and on the other 2 levels. So essentially, you kind of walk through the bathroom in this. These are the lavatory sinks over here, and then just, you know, a little walkway to a sweet little shower and soaking tub off of here. And so you recaptured that circulation that might otherwise be tied up in a bathroom, and instead you just use it as, you know, the circulation to get over to the bedroom, which isn't much of a bedroom at all. This is one where, you know, we really pushed the bed right up to the windows because I think it's just going to be, you know, a richer experience. And again, the super wall.
My turn. I like that super wall. I think that super wall is pretty cool. I think the key to all small houses is millwork. I only say that because I'm a millworker, but no, it's true. I think if you can treat a little house like a sailboat, it's the best thing you could ever do. And here's our first laneway house. And because there's only one person I know here from Vancouver, I can say that this laneway house went in before there was laneway houses. So it's actually billed as a potting studio. But it's a beautiful little 300 square foot home where we squeezed in a little loft up above, and it remains near and dear to my heart as this little jewelry box that I love. So, but we started off at SmallWorks doing studios. We've probably done about 60, 70 projects over the last 5 years. Initially started off the company because there was no laneway housing, and we were in love with backyards and we love little courtyards, and I really wanted to try and start to get this happening in Vancouver for all the reasons I've mentioned before. And so we started doing these little studios, and we did quite a few of these over 2 or 3 years. We were advocating for the laneway house program. And during that time, we established a pretty sophisticated prefab system. You know, I'm happy to report it takes about a week for us to build the panels, the roofs, and the floors for a house in our shop. and we can ship them out to site. We have a proprietary building envelope system that is very similar to a lot of things that happen with the passive housing. And it takes us 5 days to get to lockup by the time we get to site, and it takes us about 16 to 18 weeks to build a house, depending on how sophisticated the house is. And so the panels go into site and they assemble, as I said, but it takes about a week to put the panels up and get the roof and the windows and doors in. And this is the product. So this is one of the first laneway houses we did in Vancouver. I showed you one from the Olympics. That was actually the first permanent laneway house in Vancouver, and this went in shortly after. And we've done about 30 homes so far in the last 3 years. And really focused on a lot of the things that have been mentioned today about really compact kitchens, really having that kitchen and common area really open to one another, and really focusing on air quality. This, as an aside, I think that's one of the biggest challenges with making a high efficiency home is air quality, and it's enhanced tenfold, I think, in a small home. And well, I know it is. And for us, we actually get about twice the rain that you have in Portland per annum, and so we're really conscious about those issues around mold and water egress. This is very typical to what we're building now, which tends to be a little on the larger side. We initially thought we'd be doing more small units, but certain regulatory things such as permits being $20,000, generally about $45,000 worth of costs between landscaping and bringing infrastructure under the property, which is something the city's looked at. We're upgrading the city services as we go along. So there's some pretty big burdens on these, but the good thing is that they're still relatively affordable based on that. But 10 people have been going for more of these little 2-bedroom units, and this represents something that's around 750 square feet of living space, plus an interior garage, which never gets used for anything but cars. Some of the things that we find are challenges that, because we're building for customers, we do often, we love to make these little compact kitchens that would be like a Swiss Army knife with pantries that are bookshelves that open up and so forth. Often though, this is for a family of 3, we do end up having to try and do more conventional work within this small space, and it does present its challenges, but the good news is it works. And these are other projects that we have on the go that are quite nice. We just finished this one. And the opportunities are found in little bits of space in the city where you do have a bit more elbow room. It's a bylaw that's quite tight around window openings and a number of neighborly considerations, which doesn't necessarily give us the flexibility we like. But again, small is great, and we love when we get to build little smaller units. So this is a 280 square foot residence we built, and a little kitchen that goes with that. Again, you're not really compromising anything, and look for all sorts of storage. And then just to quickly surmise, I know we're running short of time, that we have a couple things that we're looking ahead that we're quite excited about. This is a house we built. This sits in what would be considered, I guess, something like a Walmart parking lot right now. This house took us 10 weeks to build. It's really nicely finished, very nicely finished, but it's designed to move, and where it's going to move to is in a really exciting community of 500 hectares that a developer has, and he's dedicating 80% of that acreage to sustainable farming, giving it to the municipality for that, and we're going to build a 40-unit walking little community where everything is centered around the old dairy barn, and all these little houses will have, much like Ross's ideas of nodal parking areas, and it's a project we're super excited about. And then looking ahead to Vancouver, what I'm really keen on doing is continuing our work with the laneway houses, but really trying to see what we can do to, I won't say fly under the radar, but with the current zoning, what can we do? And one thing that we're really keen on is currently in the single family neighborhoods, you can have a laneway house, or an ADU, as it's called here. You can have a basement suite, and you can also have a principal residence. So one thing we're starting to do is really look at developing, going back to a building form. So this building on that's closest to me is actually my house. And it's this was built it'll be 100 years old next week. And it's 2 800 square foot flats built on top of each other. And this is the first house that was built in about a 20-block radius. And it's great, and it exists. It's never had an interior staircase, and it exists like that. And so what we're starting to do is, the image on the other side is a house we built along the same dynamics, where the secondary suite in the house is 48% of the house. and mixing this with the Langley House and looking at co-ownership as a way to try to create affordability without necessarily having to go through the rigors of rezoning and the regular advocacy that we're doing now will continue, but this is something we're hoping we can bring to the floor immediately to start to help the housing situation. So that's the end of my slides, and thank you very much for your time.
Ends the formal presentation, but we're right at the time where we said we were going to quit, but since we started a little late, I would like to open it up to some questions. And did I say that?
Yeah, Ronnie right here, and so just raise your hand.
I am a sailboat designer. And I was interested, I didn't seem to see any SIP panels on these. We've been using sandwich panels for years with the sailboats. And these, what I could tell, seem to be stick frame. Any comments on that?
Well, you know, I'm sure Jake has something to say. Some of the last project that we showed, it wasn't made with SIP panels, but we did use a lot of rigid insulation, and we kind of created almost site-built sandwich system with decking below that's exposed, and that's the 2x tongue and groove decking that you can see inside the house, the whole ceiling. Yeah. Well, it's not for a boat. But then rigid insulation, and then the roofing on top of that, so it's a pretty effective thermal barrier.
Yeah, and you know, for us, we've been looking at SIPs a little bit, and this also goes hand in hand with the other notions of insulation. But you know, with some of the foams and the greenhouse gas emissions involved in just the general production of some of these foams, we're evaluating that in context of other options. And there's some other insulations that we tend to favor. We like to use cellulose a lot in our projects just because it's also got some moisture mitigation properties that gives us a little bit of a belt and suspenders approach to the indoor air quality that Jake was bringing up.
Yeah, I've built a few houses with SIPs. I'm not a big fan of it. I would normally go into discussing just my concerns around water, but if you're building sailboats and using that, I'm not going to put up that argument as vehemently. But my take on it now, having built for about 25 years now, is I really prefer, for those better building envelope systems, looking at putting the insulation on the outside of the structure, leaving the internal cavity, and we build out of 2x4s open, because we just feel that there's a number of opportunities to mitigate the issues of basically the concerns we have around mold. And the other thing, and it's not a great scenario, but I really prefer a breathing wall when possible. And although the code doesn't allow us to do that, this is a gesture towards that, because if the building envelope does fail, you have a release of energy, which obviously you don't want, but you're not creating a cavity to capture molds and organics. So that's why I prefer doing a stick frame with insulation on the exterior.
Question for Jake. You showed your plant there, a facility, and you're prefabricating large parts of the houses. Do you do that for quality control or cost savings, or what?
Well, I would say it's a little of both. I think the two things, having been in the field as a framer, and starting off that way, I just find there's significant efficiencies in a factory setting. And we're not reinventing the wheel there. We're not doing like a closed wall system, but we are doing all the framing. And we find that a couple of things is that on-site time is very expensive. Our labor costs are significantly higher than they are in the States, let's say, especially for field people. The average carpenter's charge-out rate's about $65 to $70 an hour. So we need to have that factory setting. The other thing is it really compresses our build time, and that on-site time is the most significant. And I think, so in the end, we get better quality control. Moisture, which is a big issue for us, again, is mitigated, at least so far as the material coming in is dry, and it goes to the site dry, and then it's got a roof, and the house is heated within a very short period of time. So those are sort of the key items to that. And as well, we're working in very tight situations. That's not greenfield building. We're working within a neighborhood. In fact, within a very narrow alley as our access point. So having those panels and bringing them in is probably the, if you look at the equation of efficiency, is probably the highest we could get.
Okay. Thank you each for your time and energy and talking about going small. I was curious about how you talk your clients into a higher cost per square foot, which we often run into with tiny houses. I mean, what are the tricks of the trade? How do you talk them into that when so much of the vernacular that we use in building is focused on lowering that per square foot dollar amount?
We like to be a real advocate for quality over quantity, and a lot of times our clients will come to us with a budget that they want to spend, and we'll know just rule of thumb cost per square foot, and we can start doing some math backwards on what size of a quality home they can accomplish for that space. And then, so that flex house example was exactly that. She wanted to spend $300,000 and change, but she didn't have a fixed idea of what the program square footage was. And so we just did the math and said, we need to be able to accomplish this program, as close to, 1,700 square feet, give or take, as possible. And then you just sit down at the drawing board and you kind of work at it from that direction. Also, the other thing that I'd say to that is, I try not to sell people on things so much. What I like to do is believe, in what we're doing, and then, and I think that it becomes a little easier that you don't have to do as much convincing or as selling, because I think, selling is often, it's felt and it's resisted.
I find there's two different scenarios to that. If it's an ADU, they typically walk into it with their eyes open. They know that that they're limited in size. They know that they're going to pay a lot of money for SDCs, but it's a choice, and they've typically made that choice already, or at least made the choice to explore it in a serious way. And the other option, when people are wanting to build small, it's a good question, and actually sometimes we would say to them, you can add a little bit more if you want, because it's not going to cost you any more money. And we actually, people do that sometimes. But typically we can't really sell it. People, they kind of need to know that when they come in. And they know, and we tell them, it's the smaller the house, the more per square foot it's going to be. And people, I think, understand that.
Okay, I think we've got time for just one last question before we break for lunch.
Question is along the same lines as hers, actually. So, have you had any of your clients where, when they went in for the valuation to get a mortgage, they may ran into some problems because the cost of the building was just too expensive that they couldn't actually finance it?
It happens it happens all the time, and that's actually an interesting discussion, because when I started my practice, 10 years ago, I thought I'll just, do design, but more and more, it became very clear that it's all about money, and it's all about, especially in the last 5 years. I feel irresponsible if I don't sit with the clients first off and say, we're going to do a very basic exploration, and we're going to find out how much it's going to cost before we design elaborate projects. It's so real. It's the reality. It's the real world, and it's very it's intense, but it's actually I think we find it that it's just the reality, and I think it does help people understand from the very, very beginning. Okay, we're going to concentrate on these issues, on the volumes. We're going to just not worry about cabinetry right now. We're going to have to do it in 10 years. Or we care about the quality, and we're just going to get more money. But these are really important decisions.
Thank you for joining us. And before we thank our panelists,
AIA continuing education credit sheets. I'm going to put down here at the far end so that I don't get mixed up with the previous one, but please thank our panelists.
Let's go about lunch real quick. If you do not have a name